New efforts to combat the surge in COVID-19 cases.
This outbreak won't collapse under its own weight.
Retailers adapt amid the holiday shopping season.
Everyone was so mindful of each other and myself and everybody else around them.
And recapping the week's headlines in Arizona politics.
This has been a very polarized election year, as you can see and feel.
Hello and welcome to Arizona 360. I'm Lorraine Rivera. Thanks for joining us. As we near the end of 2020, COVID-19 cases are surging across the country. To flatten the curve in Arizona, this week leaders in Tucson passed a mandatory curfew in effect now from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. through the 23rd. Governor Doug Ducey also declared that an impending vaccine would be free for all Arizonans. Arizona's current outbreak traces back to September and has only gotten worse. Dr. Joe Gerald, a member of the University of Arizona's COVID-19 modeling team, discussed the current trends with us.
Yeah, so Arizona is facing a very serious COVID-19 crisis right now. The most important manifestation of this is our hospitals are full, and physicians are now having to make difficult decisions about which patients get care today versus those whose care is going to be pushed into the future. And this is only going to become more difficult and more agonizing as we delay our interventions.
This week, today, you and I are talking. It's Wednesday. There are 340,000 confirmed cases in the state, 6,700 deaths. What do you see happening over the next few months here if we don't get a hold of the situation right now?
Well, we're expecting that hospitals could be overwhelmed as soon as Christmas if action is not immediately taken. And so thinking about what January might look like, that's way into the distant future. And the trajectory we are on currently is enough to put us in a very dangerous situation come the end of this month.
There have been many reports about how the number of deaths are decreasing or not as high as they once were when the pandemic began. Does that give you some hope?
It does. I mean, it allows us to carry a higher number of cases without the same consequences. And so, from the peak or the last surge in June or July, hospitalizations are down by about a quarter and deaths are down by about a half. And so, that's really great news. We have made important progress in the care of patients with coronavirus disease. Nonetheless, if we allow enough people to get infected, it will still overwhelm our system even if we are doing better at treating those that show up.
What should we be doing right now? You continue to hear from people who question the seriousness of this virus.
Right. And so my public health colleagues and I at the University of Arizona have recommended a 3-week shelter in place between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And the goal with this is really several fold. First and foremost is to reduce the frequency of human interactions. We need to keep people away from each other so that there's not an opportunity for the virus to transmit. Barring that, if people need to engage in essential activities, we need to reduce the density of interactions. We need to keep people physically apart from each other, and we need to reduce the duration of those interactions. They should be short, the business should get done, and people should move on and get out. And lastly, thinking about what we can do to make those interactions safer by reducing their exposure to infectious particles. So that involves wearing a face mask, performing good hand hygiene, having physical barriers. Those are important additional mitigation steps. Sometimes it's changing setting, moving from indoors to outdoors, increasing ventilation by opening windows. It's really this combination of interventions that's necessary. There's no one thing that will stop or slow the spread of the virus, but we need to be tackling each of these parts in the transmission chain.
In your opinion, time is of the essence.
It is of the essence. We have only a matter of weeks to act before this really overwhelms us. And there are a lot of policy options that can be taken to mitigate this spread. The thing that we have to avoid, though, is doing nothing. This outbreak won't collapse under its own weight. There's still too many Arizonans that remain susceptible to the virus, that this escalation of cases could continue for many, many weeks and be many orders of magnitude worse than we're seeing now.
And finally, Dr. Gerald, what is your message to people who can't help themselves and they're looking forward to the holidays and being with family?
Yeah, and so it's very difficult for the general public to grasp, I think, this kind of abstract concept that we're in a crisis. Fewer than 10% of us require hospital care in a given year. And to think about hospitals being overwhelmed, it's hard for that to be salient to individuals. But it's not just individuals who have coronavirus that are at risk of not getting the care that they need, but any Arizonan who has a serious medical condition, heart disease, kidney disease, cancer, is going to find it more difficult to access the care that they need when they need it if we allow our hospitals to be overwhelmed with coronavirus. And so I think uh, all of us can recognize family members and friends who suffer from these conditions and making a sacrifice on their behalf so that they can have the care that they need when they need it is one way to help reinforce this message when it may not seem uh, personally at risk.
Okay, Dr. Joe Gerald, thank you.
Thank you.
I understand how exhausted and fatigued you are with this pandemic. I am too. But we need to stay the course. Brighter days are ahead.
This week,
There
Tucson
is
Mayor
light
Regina Romero
at the end
delivered
of
her
the
State
tunnel.
of the City address. Her speech underscored the pandemic's health and economic impacts, along with efforts to help those most affected. We discussed the city's approach and ongoing needs with Tucson Metro Chamber President Amber Smith.
Tucson is a small business town, and that's what is such an important factor to remember. Small businesses do not have huge profit margins or reserve funds. So for them, every drop in revenue is incredibly impactful because largely their overhead can't change. So small businesses are getting hit all over the community.
The city of Tucson has seen something like $96 million come to the region by way of the CARES Act. At some point, though, those dollars will dry up. Then what?
That is a great question. And I think it's the question most people have through this pandemic. So the city had the CARES Act, and there was also the federal program for payroll protection plan. Well, those funds also have to be spent by the end of the year. So what you once had a area for businesses to get some resources, every single bit of it is drying up. Congress does have another plan out there for billions more in resources, but without that safety net, those doors are going to start to close.
The city has done some things like issue moratoriums on water, city-owned rent, free public transportation. At some point, though, those things will need to be paid for, so who would foot the bill?
Well, the city water department's actually an enterprise fund. And that means that all the money that they come in, they keep, and it is not related to taxpayer dollars at all. So I'm sure that either the city will use from their own general fund to help offset some of those fees in that separate department, or there's reserves in that department as well. I think the city is trying to get as creative as they can in trying to be able to pull resources from different areas to help those citizens.
The creativity of the city, though, is it enough? Is it what you'd like to see at this point?
Well, funds are finite in general. Of course, we want to be able to have some lax regulation, and the city has been assisting restaurants in particular about extension of premise permits, allowing them to have more, patio seating and that type of thing. And they have the CARES Act fund, and then the mayor also set up her resiliency fund as well. But in a city of so many small businesses and so many nonprofits, those funds are finite, but the demand is going to far exceed it. And it's not a slight on the city, it's simply a reality of the situation. So we need to get even more creative to see what else can we do to protect those businesses as well as the health and safety of our community.
In the mayor's State of the City address, she mentioned that there are 20,000 nonprofits that call Tucson home. How have they fared through all this?
Well, the benefit of many of those nonprofits is they did receive some payroll protection funds. There were a lot of nonprofit funds granted throughout. However, much like small businesses, nonprofits largely operate the same way and have zero-based budgets. I mean, having reserves, some have it for their own, to be fiscally sound, but the mission of nonprofits is giving back. So they don't have these huge pockets of money because they're using every resource they already have to give back. So certainly they're going to have to shutter their doors or, again, collaborate. So perhaps we're going to see some real opportunity come out. And of those 20,000 nonprofits, perhaps it comes down to a smaller number, and not because missions aren't being fulfilled, but because they've started to partner up with each other and reduce the number, but increase the impact.
All right. Finally, Amber, the mayor admits that it's going to be a tough road to recovery, but she's optimistic. What's your prognosis?
I think she's right. I think Tucson still has so much to offer in recruiting talent and businesses. We do have wide open spaces, which companies now really see the importance of. And as long as we continue to invest in our critical services, such as public safety and infrastructure, those companies and talent will still come here, pandemic or not.
All right, Amber Smith from the Tucson Metro, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
For a deeper dive into the state of Southern Arizona's economy, we checked in with University of Arizona economist George Hammond, whose latest forecast is tracking a recovery padded in part by funds from the CARES Act. The state of Arizona has received about $40 billion in CARES Act funding. Describe to me, what did that do to the state during the pandemic?
I think it was a big help to the state in our recovery. Among that $40 billion, about $23 billion was the economic impact payments, or the so-called recovery rebates. The next biggest program was actually related to unemployment. So that was the expanded unemployment benefits, both the expansion of unemployment insurance coverage to the self-employed and gig workers, among others, and the $600 per week supplement, as well as other benefits. And the smallest program, at about $5 billion, was the Paycheck Protection Program. But, all of those put together was a significant stimulus to the state economy. We have data for the second quarter, and in the second quarter, Arizona's personal income actually rose by almost 12% over the year. And that was really entirely driven by that infusion of funds through the CARES Act.
Was it sustainable, or is it sustainable, I should ask?
No, the CARES Act, most of the programs in the CARES Act expire at the end of the year. That $600 weekly supplement expired at the roughly the end of July. It was replaced by a $300 weekly supplement through the Trump administration that expired in early September. So we're down to the regular weekly benefit in Arizona, which is a maximum of $240 per week. The extension of UI coverage to the self-employed and gig workers, that will end at the end of this year. And many of the other CARES Act programs will also expire at the end of this year.
Which sectors have managed to fare well and others have not?
Well, the hardest hit sectors are the ones that you would think. They're the travel and tourism related sectors in leisure and hospitality. Eating and drinking places have actually come back a little bit better than have jobs in accommodations, so hotels and motels, and the arts, entertainment, and recreation center. Those are really lagging significantly further behind. The kind of temporary help sort of jobs, those are always the first to go in a recession, and they are still struggling to recover. We're also seeing, significant job losses in education and healthcare because people just don't feel, safe going back to their regular doctor and dentist appointments just yet. The sectors that are doing better is really primarily the wholesale and retail trade. They're back to roughly where they were in February of this year, but it's the transportation and warehousing sector that's well above where it was in February. That's a sector that's reflecting the expansion of online sales and the expansion of delivery services.
In reviewing your economic outlook report that you recently put together, population growth is continuing. What do you attribute that to?
Yeah, I think it's largely attributable to the fact that Arizona is a really nice place to live. We have a great climate. We have fast job growth. So it's an attractive place before the pandemic. I think the pandemic is making Arizona perhaps a little bit more attractive. We see more and more remote workers. Those remote workers, if they can work from everywhere, why not work in a place with a relatively low cost of living, relatively affordable housing, and certainly compared to the major metropolitan areas in other Western states, Arizona looks really good. So I think we're benefiting from that in the near term.
Of the jobs added this quarter, which city, Tucson or Phoenix, seemed to outperform the other?
Well, they're both doing okay. They're both kind of in a similar state of recovery. Phoenix jobs are, in the neighborhood of 3% below where they were in February. Tucson is about 4% where it was in February. So those are both doing relatively well. It's really among the metro areas in Arizona, it's Flagstaff that is still lagging the furthest behind. Their jobs in October were almost 18% below where they were in February of this year.
George, your report indicates that there's some reason to be optimistic. Am I reading it correctly?
Yeah, if the message that I try to leave people with is that, as we think about Arizona and its economy, we were in really good shape before the pandemic. The pandemic has hit the state hard, but not as hard as it has many other states in the nation. And, I think as we work our way through the next year, we'll see Arizona get back to significantly faster growth than most states.
All right, Dr. George Hammond, thank you.
Thank you.
That optimism expressed includes the holiday shopping season, a mainstay of the retail industry that has had to adjust to the pandemic over the year. We saw how some small retailers in Tucson are trying to make the most of the situation. Under the pandemic, traditions ushered in with the holidays are undergoing transformations. After 5 years in Tucson, CULTIVATE is one of those emerging traditions, doing things differently this year.
Planning and just thinking about CULTIVATE this year was like, could we do an outdoor market? Could we just do online? Could we do a virtual kind of meet and greet with vendors? But thinking through all of those things and with the risks of COVID in our community, this was kind of the middle of the road option that provided enough sales opportunity for vendors.
Prior to the pandemic, the pop-up marketplace brought together dozens of local vendors and hundreds of potential buyers, all under one roof for a one-day event.
It's a really high energy, a big sales day for vendors. And for customers, it's really exciting to get to meet and see all of these people that they either follow on social media or use their products, get to have that face-to-face connection.
One of CULTIVATE's co-founders, Kristen Tovar, says changes this year include a scaled-down setup at the MSA Annex outside of downtown with limited occupancy indoors, offering shoppers private appointments, setting up an online marketplace, and extending the event from a single day to 6 weeks.
Opening day, I wasn't able to come, and had it been a one-day market, I wouldn't have been able to be here, so I'm really excited. And though it's a smaller space and it's not hundreds of people around right now, that's a good thing, so I still feel safe shopping here.
This is my first time coming down to the space in person, and I just dropped off some more soap and more pieces to restock, but I know that the weekend, just from what I heard and saw, it was a really great success.
For vendors like Ashley Abrosio, who sells handmade soaps and pottery under the label Spring and Vine, pop-up events like CULTIVATE are crucial toward helping her year-old business thrive.
These markets are a substantial part of the income that I make, whether it's the soap or the pottery. It's usually something that people want to see and feel and smell and use their senses.
Abrosio participated in last year's CULTIVATE. Returning vendors also include Shazier Gorzi. Gorzi's Agave Pantry features her own baked goods, pottery, and linens.
I was the featured vendor on Sunday, just this past week, when I was set up right outside here. And I was curious how it's going to work out, but everyone was so mindful of each other and myself and everybody else around them.
When she first launched her business, Gorzy says she mostly relied on pop-up events to make sales, but that changed in March when the pandemic led to cancellations, lockdowns, and changes in consumer habits.
In March, we kind of shut down. People had emptied the shelves of butter, non-GMO almond flour. The ingredients I use, flour, people were making bread. So I just stopped. So actually, now that I look back, from March through April and even mid-May, I didn't bake because I thought, okay, I can't be running a business and taking so many ingredients when people are home and trying to bake for themselves and adapt.
Gorzy adapted herself, pivoting more toward wholesale deals with stores and online sales. A cottage license also allows her to sell baked goods from home.
Pre-pandemic, my website would get orders, but not the same way as it does now, because I was going to markets more than, 1 or 2 a month. And so since then, the website has been really integral to the business growing, essentially.
Agave Pantry's uptick in online orders mirrors trends nationally. According to the National Retail Federation, so far e-commerce sales are up more than 35% over last year. Adobe tracked more than $10 billion in spending on Cyber Monday, a 15% increase from 2019. Despite financial setbacks the pandemic dealt many, the National Retail Federation estimates holiday shoppers will spend anywhere from $26 to $37 billion more than they did last year, in part because of a drop in spending on things like entertainment and travel.
There's an element, I think, even of giving gifts or shopping this holiday season that's bringing a sense of joy that really, has been lacking for the most part in 2020. So there's something too about feeling good about supporting your local community and, being a part of making it continue. So I think you're buying into something bigger than just a product, but it definitely is a huge boost to our economy too.
Sometimes I'll, do a mix of chains or Amazon or whatever, but I like to at least do a little something from Cultivate each year.
As for Cultivate's plans in 2021, Tovar says that will depend on how the holidays go.
We don't have any markets planned yet, but you can bet that Cultivate will come up with some kind of way for you to support local artists and businesses.
With the ongoing coronavirus crisis as the backdrop, politics in Arizona made headlines this week, most recently with the swearing in of Democratic U.S. Senator Mark Kelly. Days earlier, Arizona certified its election results at the ceremony where Governor Ducey and Secretary of State Katie Hobbs defended its accuracy. It coincided with a meeting held by Republican state lawmakers and Trump attorney Rudy Giuliani, who claims otherwise. For analysis on the week's events, we turn to Arizona Capital Times editor Luigi Del Puerto. This election hearing no doubt created some political divide. How do you see that manifesting itself this legislative session?
It's going to be a really difficult session. And for one, we still have COVID-19. And I'm not sure the leaders in the State House and in the State Senate have figured out exactly how to navigate through that. We are hoping that there's going to be, the vaccines are going to be distributed, but we don't know if that will happen quickly. This has been a very polarized election year, as you can see and feel, and that could manifest itself in all sorts of ways. It's a new legislature. You have new members, and what that means is you'll have to find new chemistry, right? New chemistry to actually get the work done. Now, Republicans still are in charge, are in the majority in both the House and the Senate. The Senate has a narrower majority. We've seen this in the House, in which one Republican member, for example, will decide not to vote on an issue, and that held things up.
One of the headlines out of that hearing was Governor Doug Ducey got a call from the White House during that when he was certifying the election results. Where does he go from here? I mean, so many Democrats and Republicans are upset with him. The president has expressed some annoyance at him. So what's next for him this legislative session?
Annoyance is probably an understatement, right? I think Donald Trump turned on our governor, and, of course, our Governor Doug Ducey has been one of the most consistent supporters of President Donald Trump. Whenever Trump was in Arizona, Doug Ducey was appeared, with him. The governor is coming off a deficit, right? So a lot of people are unhappy about his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. That's one. I'm not sure exactly how much support he lost among the Republican base now that the president has, turned on him. So those are the kinds of challenges that he will face going into the next 2 years. But no doubt about it, he's still the governor, and you need him to agree in order for your legislation to get enacted into law.
All right, let's switch gears here and talk about Mark Kelly, officially now Arizona's new senator. He hit the ground running early with his COVID-19 task force. What do we expect to gain from him here in the next few weeks as the pandemic seems to hit this new surge?
Right, there are some pretty big challenges that Arizona faces, but really the whole country faces. Like among them is help to people who are out of work. And there's hundreds and thousands of them, millions of Americans that are out of work because of the pandemic. So the expectation is that he will work toward getting as much as possible in terms of finances to the state.
All right, what kind of senator will he be for Arizona? On the campaign trail, he said, not Democrat, not Republican, I'm just for Arizona.
Right, so we kind of saw that, well, not kind of saw that, we saw that in Kyrsten Sinema. Here's a Democratic legislator or former Democratic legislator, used to be pretty progressive on the liberal end of the political spectrum, ran as a centrist and voted as a centrist. I think the expectation is that Mark Kelly will do the same thing. I want to point out one thing. Arizona has always had an outsized influence in the U.S. Congress. What I mean by that is we had Carl Hayden, who facilitated the Central Arizona Project, for example. We have John McCain. John McCain has ensured, for example, that our military bases are protected in Arizona. We don't have those two icons anymore. And I think there's an expectation on the part of the Arizona public that Kyrsten Sinema will grow into that role at some point. And, Mark Kelly, if he were to stay on a more permanent basis, remember he's facing an election in 2 years, will also grow into that role, outsized political figures that would do a lot of things for the state.
All right, and their signature issue, we will have to wait and see until they hit the ground running. All right, Luigi Del Puerto from the Arizona Capital-Times, thank you. That's all for now. Thanks for joining us. To get in touch, visit us on social media or send an email to Arizona360@azpm.org and let us know what you think. We'll see you next week.